What's up, guys? It's Jonathan Erber here with another informational video that will hopefully be not a lot of BS, just a lot of rapid fire information for you about your favorite subject, if your favorite subject is TDI swaps. Well, or at least into a Dodge Dakota. Hey, look at that gauge cluster. Alright, that was BS, but let's go. Alright, so let's get it up in the air. We'll take a look under it, see what we did. One thing I would say while this is going up is you don't have to be super wealthy to do a TDI swap for sure. There's some expensive parts to it, but this one had a bad 4.7 liter, and there's so many bad 4.7s out there that I actually got like $400 for the old 4.7, and got rid of the transmission that was in here. I sold it for $800, I think. That was the 5-speed Dodge transmission. So right there I'm starting off, I mean, granted the price of the truck, but well, the truck was, I got cheap, $750 or $700. Anyway, but right there I'm starting off ahead, whatever that is, $1,200 or so. So yeah, going into this swap, I was like $1,200 ahead, and let's see, I got the engine. I traded a pistol for a '99 Volkswagen Beetle, and so that's where I got the engine from. It's probably a $500 non-running Beetle, and then I went through it and got it running right. It didn't need much, I forget. Well, anyway, but that was that. Something's dripping. I'll have to look into what that is. This transmission, this is an NSG 370. If you shop around, you can find deals on it. I got this one for $250. It needed new shift forks, and then shift forks are like $400 or I forget, $350, something like that. And then the transfer case is a factory Dodge transfer case. I wanted to use the electronic four-wheel drive shift, so I kept that. The front drive shaft is the Dodge drive shaft. I took, I think, an inch and a, at the back here, I cut it and took out inch and a half or inch and 3/4 or something like that. You'd have to measure how much you move forward. But that's what I did there. The transmission mount, the Dodge transmission mount has bolts on the back and bolts on the front. You can see where I cut those two off. And then those drop through these 4 holes here. Well, I just used the back two and slid it all the way forward, and that got me far enough forward to clear firewall at the back of the engine there and bolt it up. This is a Whitbread transmission adapter going from the TDI to a 4-liter straight 6 NSG 370. So this transmission was out of a 2005 or 2006 Jeep Wrangler with a 4-liter straight 6. So Matt Whitbread, I think his kits are $800, $900, something like that, and I'm really happy with it. That includes the whole thing: starter motor, flywheel adapter, this ring, and that plate. You can clock it in 3 positions, and I clocked it, I think, if I remember right, looking at the engine from the front, I turned the engine all the way toward the driver's side. So it's as vertical as it can get, I think is what I did there. So yeah, then this bolted in here. The Wrangler transmission bolted right up to the Dodge Dakota transfer case. I did need to take an air hammer and a flat punch. You can see, there we go. Massage the floor a bunch and put that curve in it to clear the back of the transfer case, because of the way the transfer case sits a little bit higher. It's just the 6 bolts at the back of the transmission are clocked this way a little bit more than the 5-speed that I took out of here, the NV3500. So anyway, the transfer case sits at a slightly different angle, but that's no problem. Obviously tons of clearance right here at the bottom of the front shaft where that transfer or that cross member goes in, which does put a little bit of an angle on that front drive shaft. You can see the angle it's coming out at there, but it is not to limit, and I've had no issues. Throw it in 4-wheel drive and she does great. yeah, you can see on the spline here, I could have been a little bit more generous with how much I took out of this shaft, but I took enough that I can still unbolt it, pull it off the front diff and drop it. There's probably 3/8 of an inch or so in this slip yoke here. And you don't really need much slip yoke because the front diff doesn't move, it's bolted to the frame, and the transfer case doesn't move. Where you need the slip is right here for the rear drive shaft, because as you're going down the road, this is articulating up and down and pushing this shaft in. So, so yeah, don't worry about that. If the front end goes in and it's not at limits, you should be fine there. Rear drive shaft, I sent the old one into the drive shaft shop to have lengthened an inch and, I forget the measurement now, 1.25 inches to 1 3/4, somewhere in that range. And they're like, let's just steal the yoke from the old, so they stole the slip yoke from the old drive shaft, and they stole the flange here on the back from the old drive shaft, and then they just made a new tube and put in new U-joints, which is great. I like having new U-joints anyway. So I've got a whole new drive shaft here from maxdrivelines.com in Spokane, and they did great. So thank you to them. Yeah, so that is how the whole drive line bolted up. The flywheel is just a flywheel from a oh, this red is Loctite from something I did up there. That's what that is. Yeah, the bottle had a dried cap and then I squeezed it and it popped, and anyway, red Loctite went everywhere. But the flywheel is from a 4-liter straight six 06 Wrangler application. Clutch is the exact same, and then this slave cylinder here is the same one from the NV 3500. I just bolted it right up to the NSG 370 and it's perfect. It's got excellent pedal feel, perfect engagement and all that kind of stuff. On the Dakota, the front diff is mounted to the engine mounts, and then the engine mounts are shock isolated to the frame. So the front diff, I could wiggle, I mean, just a tiny bit separate from the frame because it's hung on shock mounts from the frame. So the new engine mounts that I made, that I fabbed up right there, you can see those. That's a kit from, I forget who makes that kit, but I just welded up those. What I did is I set the engine in this space sitting here on the front diff, lifted it up, 3/8 of an inch or something, and put a block in there, and then went up top to check how much clearance I had between the top of the engine and the hood. And I had like, I don't know, 1/2 inch of clearance at the top. And so I realized I'm gonna need to sit really close right here. Let's see. I'm gonna need to sit really close right here in order to get it to work right up top. I ended up a little bit higher than I needed to, but that's what I did there. Engine mount there, I did grind down the side of the engine mount, the cast aluminum right there on the original Dodge part. Ground that down a little bit, and I had to cut out the gusset a tiny bit after I was doing the final fitting just to get everything to sit, because the engine needed to sit as far toward the passenger side as possible, because on this side, let me see if I can get eyes up in here. On this side, I use the AC delete bracket there, and I had to cut that to fit around the engine mount, so I've got 1 mount at the back and 2 at the front. And then I did the same thing on this side. There you can see the engine mount. There she is. So I had to do that. But the engine just hard mounts to the bracket that the front diff is bolted to, and then all that bolts with shock mounts to the frame. The vibration through the cab's rough, but it's not too rough. Okay, at the back, this is coolant leak. I'm gonna need to repair a leak here. This is the old mount from the Dodge Dakota. The Dodge Dakota, the back of the diff bolts to the bell housing, but on the, let me see if I can get this right. On the NV 3500, the front of the bell housing sits here, And on this one, because I slid it forward, it's sitting on the other side. So what I did was I got the angle of the diff right after everything was situated with the engine, more or less. Got the angle of the diff right, bolted in a nut to the bell housing, and then I filled it with weld so that I had just the perfect fit between this bracket and the nut provided the flat surface for the back of the bell housing there. And then I just ran a long bolt all the way through into the Whitbread adapter, and that all is shored up pretty good. So yeah, that's how I mounted the back of this. So the front diff is mounted to the engine mounts on the front right and front left, and then on the back it goes to the bell housing, and you got to do something there, otherwise it'll flop and mess up your engine mounts, which is just not an option. It has to be done. I think that is it for underneath here. Exhaust comes down pretty nice over the starter there. You can see I have the cam sensor, well, it's the crank sensor for the 4-liter straight six there in the side of the bell housing. And this wire that comes down here that's unplugged right now is the cam sensor. So what I'm planning to do for the tachometer, you probably noticed when I was running it initially, the tachometer was not operating because I don't have a crank sensor running yet. On the front of the diff, or front of the engine, right now I have the factory pulley, but there's gonna be another pulley here that is a different style. Let me show you. This is the pulley I'm planning to use, and it's got a second belt here, you can see, which I'm gonna use for AC, but then on the back of it, I had this plate cut out. I took a picture of a tone ring for a 2001 Dodge Dakota with the 4.7 and sent it to my machinist, and he sized it up to the outside of this pulley and cut the pattern out. So I should be able to bolt this to the front of the engine, put a crank sensor here, and the Dodge PCM should be able to pick that up for my tachometer. So that's what's going to go on the front of the engine. It all fits perfectly if you remove the lower timing cover. This tone ring here fills the gap just fantastic. If you want one of those tone rings to play with, let me know. I could always have my machinist just run another one and I can mail it to you or something like that. But that's what I'm planning to do for the crank sensor. In order for the Dodge crank sensor to start reading this ring though, it needs something from the cam sensor. So that's why I still have the 4-liter straight six crank sensor in there, is when I turn the key to ignition or to start, it's going to open a relay to, or close a relay to the signal wire on this sensor. That will give the PCM enough pulse to start looking at the crank sensor, and then once I stop cranking the engine, that cam sensor signal will shut off. Otherwise it's going to be really just messy data to the computer. So I'm just going to give it that momentary pulse from the 4-liter crank sensor acting as the 4.7-liter cam sensor, and then it should run off of this tone ring here. We'll see how that goes. That is not finished yet, but that is why I have all this space here to the passenger side of the front of the engine. I'm making a bracket that's going to bolt up right there, not using the factory Passat bracket that a lot of people use. And the reason for that is if I did, I ran into my frame. So I need a much smaller bracket, and I'm gonna run a smaller pump here, and I have that on the shelf. Hold on. So this is the compressor, 68573. Don't buy this. It comes up as being the same compressor that I wanted to use with standard fittings, and it's almost the same compressor, but it's got non-standard fittings. So I'm not going to be able to use this specific compressor, but other than the goofy fittings on this, I can still use it for mock-up, and I already opened the box and whatnot, so I'm kind of stuck with it now. But maybe I'll post in the description what the actual pump is that I was going for. But it's a pretty common swap pump. It's pretty small, you can see, but it's got enough volume still to do what I'm doing. Let me pause this again. Okay, I gotta hold the flashlight, but you can see that pump has got all kinds of space up in there. Really not going to be a problem for fitting that in. Yeah, she's got lots of space. So anyway, that's what I'm going to run. Okay, I think that pretty much covers the underside. Oh, there is one other thing I was going to say. Fuel tank. I pulled the fuel pump module out of there and swapped in a like 8 psi, 10 psi lift pump from an old Cadillac or something like that. Some GM application, but I was able to disassemble the fuel pump module and put that in. So then I'm using all the factory wiring for the fuel pump, and the Dodge PCM turns that on, and that's great. I am using the factory filler neck also, and then up top I just punched out the restriction for the gas pump. Hold on, let me lower it down. Okay, with that down, you can see I just got a diesel cap with a tether, and then I grabbed an air hammer and just broke off the tabs right there, and there, air hammer with a little chisel, ping, 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 and now it'll accept a full-size diesel fuel nozzle. So that's what I ran there. Stripped the whole evap system out. So that's completely gone. On the Dakota, it runs up here and sits all down in here. This is all evap stuff, and down under there is all evap under the fuse box. So I just gutted that. That's all gone. Let's go take a look at wiring harness and what I had to do for that. This is all on my Facebook page if you want to go online and check it out. But I took the whole Dodge harness and I just laid it out. You can see fuel injectors and coil connectors here. It's almost laid out like it's on the engine. I just went through and stripped out everything that was not needed for either four-wheel drive. So I've got four-wheel drive stuff here. I've got a leg that's got cam and crank sensor on it, temperature sensor, some of those kind of things. I labeled it all and then just stripped it down. Let's go back, and I am making one of my... So the Dodge harness runs from these connectors here up around the back, and then comes in right here. Sorry, the lighting is not good. Let me fix this. This should be a little bit better. Harness comes up down here and routes up along here. This is the Dodge harness there. Runs over here, comes forward for AC controls and crank sensor. That's going to be all down there on that bracket when I add it down there. And then I've got circuits running back for my cam sensor, and a brake off over here running behind the brake booster down back for four-wheel drive. And that's all I needed for the Dodge setup to run my gauges. Oh yeah, there's the connector for my temperature sensor running up to the heater core there. And my oil pressure sensor wiring comes down here and is right there. Obviously this all needs to be loomed up, but for now I just finished it and it's working. So that's what that is. Yes, I did not finish it. There's one wire still need to add for power supply to my turbo solenoid, but that's on the Volkswagen side. Anyway, that's what that wire hanging out is there for. This is my pyrometer. I dropped that in, cut the flange off, stuck it in so it sits right in the flow of the exhaust, and then boost came off my race pipe, ran inside. Let's go check out those gauges. Dakotas use the same steering column as a Ram, so if you get the Ram gauge pod that sits right on top here, you can throw gauges in there. You might notice that I've got like a funky green tint across the front of the gauges. These are HI, I forget the name of that brand, but you can get them on Amazon, and I really liked them. It was like $200 for the set. But when I kick my illumination on, the white gauges and then the green dash didn't match up, so I put green tint on here, and then these were greener than that, so I added green LEDs behind that, and now it matches up pretty nice. So that's kind of a lot more cohesive for my dash. So anyway, that's what I did there. The back of the gauge cluster, I crushed the bulb for the check engine light, and then I added a glow plug light over there. You can see down where an automatic would have shift position. Let me go back and cycle that again so you can see it. Let's see. One thing that is interesting is it doesn't go all the way out, which is probably a known thing for the swap community, but I didn't know it. It's short cycling because the engine's kind of warm right now. But anyway, that all works right. There's no issues with running four-wheel drive or pretty much anything. It all works the way it should. Fun little side note, not swap related, but you can get a double DIN conversion kit now for your Dakota Dash, which is sweet. Love it. So that's the Dodge harness, what I did there. The Volkswagen harness, the TD Swaps, I think is the name of the guy, on YouTube. He's got a great video for if you're gonna go pull a harness out of a car. I watched it, I went out, a friend had a Jetta sitting in the weeds, and I went out there and I pulled the harness. First time pulling a harness, I had it out in like 10 or 15 minutes, super fast, just broop, and he's got the instructions of where to cut it and all that kind of stuff. So that's great. This is a Duralast fuel filter there mounted to one of the studs that were already on the firewall. I use that, run it up over to here for my pump. The return line, switch that around so it's nice and tidy coming out down there. The hole in the firewall I cut right there, you can see, and I do have a nice bulkhead connector off of Amazon that I'm going to stick on there. Pictures are in my Facebook album if you want to see that. But the run from the engine to just under the steering column is really short. It's hard to actually see how short that is, but that's where I put the PCM. The Volkswagen PCM sits in here in this space just above the hood latch and under the column. Perfect space here for that to sit. There's some screws coming up through, so I put some rubber vibration isolators on there. That's kind of how that sits. I think I'm going to put a rubber mat or some sound dampening or something in there just to lift it off of those so the screws don't poke through eventually. This is the factory OBD2 port, and then I added the Volkswagen one on the side right here so I can tap into either computer. Swapped out the pedal for the Volkswagen pedal and just made a little bracket that spaces that assembly away from the wall about 1.25 inches. My relays are right now just stuffed up in there. Let's see if we can get in and see. There's the 109 relay, as well as my glow plug relay is all in there. But very convenient location to have tapped into my ignition wires, and all this I pulled from the wires at the back of the cluster. There's an ignition wire that I used as trigger there, as well as illumination. And no, I didn't need illumination. What did I need? Oh, I needed illumination for my gauges up in here. So yeah, all the wires I tapped into the Dodge are right here, coming from the wires at the back of the gauge cluster. Super simple place to tap in. So that's that. Let's pop back under the hood. Oh, before we go under the hood, this does have the 6-speed in it now. And the 6-speed shifter comes up through in a kind of awkward spot. So I actually have this running down to right here, and then an arm that goes forward that I welded in about 5 inches to where the actual top of the shifter is. So the top of the shifter coming out of the transmission sits up here, comes back, and then comes up. And so it's kind of a long throw, but it's comfortable, and I think it looks good. So that's that, and then this little bit of the harness I left out. This is everything I need for cruise control. Brake switches and cruise control buttons and all that kind of stuff. So when I'm ready to patch that in, I just have one harness to deal with right there. Sounds like people are starting to show up for work, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up pretty quick. Factory turbo, I ran the intake pipes up here. This is the like $135 intercooler off of Amazon. This is a Ford radiator from like a Bronco or something like that, I forget. And then I mounted the AC condenser there on just some flat stock. You can see I used the same bolts in the core support and made a bracket that runs across and bolts in on this side of the core support similarly. Yeah, there it is. And then bottom of the radiator bolts to that frame that I built, and the top of it comes here. I'm going to put some nicer spacers in there once I have some time to do some tidying. And then of course some weather stripping to seal the air gap between the AC condenser and the radiator, so that the aftermarket fan, when it kicks on, actually pulls through both of those. And at the bottom, you can see I just plugged right into the Dodge harness, and the Dodge PCM is gonna manage this based on coolant temperature from coolant temperature sensor there in the heater circuit. That's the Dodge side of things. Coolant for the TDI, I used a different housing that just has radiator outlet, and radiator outlet's supposed to come out on the driver's side. I flipped it over so it comes out this way, and made this pipe to run along the front of the engine, or to the front of the engine. So that's that. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's any other high points to hit. I think that's pretty much it. The vacuum pump on the TDI does supply plenty of vacuum for the brake booster. And this is the factory power steering hose coming up here from the Dodge. And then at the end of the rubber, I cut it and put on this banjo fitting and bolted it onto the power steering for the Volkswagen pump there. This reservoir is from a Dodge Caravan, I think, and I just drilled down through the battery plate there, and the reservoir sits on that so tight. It kind of goes on and then snaps down, and then the bolt holds it secure. It's insane. It's like it was made that way. Everything is just kind of fallen together on this build. It's surprisingly good. The top here looks really high, and it kind of is. You can see it just barely sticks out over the top of the fenders here, and the hood has just enough curve that when it comes down, this comes up and sits right here between these ribs. And so it fits. We're good. Anyway, that's it. Feel free to ask questions. I'll kind of keep an eye on it and try to help anybody out who's doing this. I do have my air filter sitting down here. I'm going to spin this around, come up this way, and use the Dodge air box, which will pull cold air from the fender, and that'll be much nicer. I do need to add a washer fluid reservoir that can plug into washer fluid wiring down there. And I think that's it. Yeah. Good times. Have fun, guys. Let me know if you have questions.